Thank you for being here, Dr. Califf. I think you guys have been the gold standard. I appreciate the fact that you're in a position that you're in, and I want to thank you for your work. I'm not going to get into activist judges. I'm not going to get into any of that stuff. The fact of the matter is that the FDA has done a great job and have done it for a long time, and it continues under your watch. I come from rural America. You touched on a little bit with the ranking member, but when we spoke last year, we talked about the importance of ensuring good health and outcomes in rural America. Given your background as a clinical researcher, we can talk about clinical trials for new and innovative medical treatments and how they work for rural America. So clinical trials are critical. You know that. For drug development, Montana's rural population face many challenges in accessing clinical trials for innovative pharmaceuticals. So the question is this: can you explain how the FDA's budget allocation supports the expansion of clinical trials to rural areas, including efforts to increase diversity in clinical research participants and ensuring safety and efficacy of the drugs for all Americans, regardless of geographic location?
Sure. Thanks for the question. I think it's critically important. I can't resist making one comment, which is that we can't ask clinical trials to fix a structural issue with our healthcare system in general. But having said that, we got to do everything we can for the clinical trials. We have an office essentially charged with dealing with diversity across the board, including clinical trials. There's a cross-agency task force working on this. We have several guidances that have come out, and of course our increasing encouragement of adoption of the use of telehealth in clinical trials is a big part of this. Here I'd also emphasize that we got to get broadband out to the rural communities. The money's allocated for that, as I understand it. So we can't use that technology unless someone is wired up in order to be able to use it. And I can't emphasize enough, let's say you have a significant cancer, driving 3 hours to get your experimental treatment, something a lot of people just can't do. And so we got to set up these systems that can efficiently get the clinical trials done. Finally, I just say the real-world evidence, which has been a big part of my career, that is using data that's all part of the healthcare system and then doing the trials more virtually, is a rapidly growing method that we're very much in favor of. So all these things are in play, but I'm not going to argue we're there yet. We've got a ways to go in this regard.
So in that regard of broadband, I can tell you the gentleman to my right, Senator Manchin, and myself worked on a bill called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Package that'll get these folks wired up as soon as we get that money out the door and get the cable in the ground, which
20
will
years
help.
ago, I had a flat tire in West Virginia, and I couldn't even use my cell phone.
Yeah.
It was not a pleasant night
And
about midnight.
that's Manchin's fault. I'll just tell you. Let me get you his phone number.
There was no way to
Not
call
that
him.
it'll
I had
work.
to wait for a passerby to come by.
I want to talk a little bit, not because I have an agenda on this. I'm just curious. You talked about approvals, and you also talked about disapprovals. Can you give me a number of the drugs that you guys take a look at? Isn't it a fairly static number that you disapprove compared to what you improve?
See, the numbers here are really hard, Senator, because this all starts when a scientist has an idea, and they're like 1 out of 1,000 ideas get into human clinical trials, because to get to a human clinical trial, you got to have the money invested, an IRB has to approve it, the FDA has to approve it. Out of those that get into the first human clinical trial, about 90% don't make it to the market.
Okay.
Now, the big change that's happened is we meet with the companies all the time. And it used to be there were a lot of applications submitted that had no hope. Now the only applications that go in are the ones that have gotten all the way to the end of the game. We get rid of all the others. Very efficient financially, but also protects patients from being enrolled in clinical trials for drugs that aren't going to work.
So you just talked about the length, so that gets me into timeliness. From your as a doctor, how do you think the FDA is doing on timeliness? And this is being somewhat self-critical, or pat yourself on the back.
Well, I think we're the fastest in the world out of the high quality. You know, there's some countries that don't have much of a regulatory system at all. That's different. We're the fastest in the world, but we're also the most thorough, and we're the only regulatory entity that does an independent analysis of the data. I'm pleased to say, as of today, we're meeting 100% of our user fee agreement requirements. Remember, industry comes in and the user fees negotiates with us, and the primary thing that they measure is whether we're meeting our timeframes that are required. And even in the midst of this recovering from the pandemic, we're now meeting all of our requirements for timeliness. We discussed earlier in the area of biologics with gene editing. That's an area that we're emphasizing where we've got to do some work.
Thank you, Dr. Califf. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, Senator Tester.